Welcome to This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World. I'm your host, Melissa Batchelor, and today I'm joined by Teresa Bonner, and she's the Executive Director at Aroha Philanthropies. And today we're going to be talking about creative aging and how it sparks joy, connection, and purpose. So welcome, Teresa. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very delighted to be here and I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing good.
Good.
So maybe before we get started, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your work with the Aroha Philanthropies.
Sure, absolutely. As you mentioned, I'm the executive director of Aroha Philanthropies, which is a private foundation founded by a woman by the name of Ellen Michelson. And she had long been interested in arts education in general, but about 8 or 9 years ago, she became very interested in older adults and what we might be able to do to really improve the experience of aging. And she saw the connection between arts education and older adults and wanted to do work in that area. So since 2013, we've made about $15 million in grants and other investments in the creative aging space. We've brought on a lot of organizations as grantees who run programs. We've funded training for them to learn how to make really successful programs for older adults. We've evaluated them, and we've really just done everything we can to encourage the development of these programs across the country. Along the way, we've created a couple of national partnerships that we think are going to have a long-term effect on how many of these programs are available across the country. One of them is with the American Alliance of Museums, which has now called on museums of all kinds around the country to develop creative aging programs and actively work against ageism in their institutions. We've also partnered with something called the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. Every state in the United States has an arts agency that seeks to make the arts and the benefits of the arts available to all citizens in their state. And they have developed a very strong interest in creative aging and see it as a way to serve older adults beyond what organizations have done in the past. So we've been on a mission. We're evangelizing about the benefits of getting involved in the arts as an older adult. Like me, I'll be 67 next month. And I've seen, as our grantees have, as our participants have, the positive effects that can have on your life.
Well, and I totally agree. So that's why I'm super excited to be able to do this podcast. So tell me how you define creative aging.
Right, that's a great question. Creative aging is a really broad topic that includes everything from programs designed to provide help for people that are suffering from diseases such as dementia, to programs for caregivers who help, to arts therapy programs. But the portion of creative aging, the big bucket of creative aging that we fund, is really about learning an art form over time in a supported environment, designed not only to allow you to grow and become creative and become more artistic, but to really increase your social connections and your social network. And that happens through the work of the teaching artist, in part, who know, teaching artists know how to have conversations with people and generate conversations among people through the art form. And so that's really at the heart of successful creative aging programs. You're learning over time from a teaching artist, you're getting better as you go, and you're making new friends.
Right, and there are other health benefits to even doing that because you're getting out of your house, you're having to walk or have some type of physical activity to get to your destination, and then you have all the emotional and social rewards of actually being there. And I think that the way creative aging or creativity and aging has been described to me before is it's chocolate to the brain. So it's a way to use a different part of your brain. And, that comes from Dr. Gene Cohen's work, who founded the Center for Aging at GW.
Yes.
So, but I remember that was one comment that somebody came up to me like out of the blue, and they were like, I love that whole chocolate for the brain.
It's a great analogy.
Point.
Yes, when we developed our focus and our desire to grow these creative aging programs, it was Dr. Cohen's study that really caused us to focus on this particular arena of learning art forms over time with social connectivity, because that's what he studied. And so when we developed our programs and engaged organizations around the country to develop creative aging programs, we were really following that model. And I just have to share with you that we too evaluated, not a scientific study, but we asked almost 2,000 people who took these programs what impact it had on them. And our evaluator said these programs were highly effective at helping older adults grow artistically, mentally, and socially. And specifically, 75% of those 2,000 people reported that they felt that because of taking this class, their mental engagement had grown. Over 2/3 said they formed new or stronger relationships. And more than half said the experience encouraged them to participate in other community activities. Surprisingly to me, to your point, Melissa, about 40% said they had increased their physical activity. Now that makes sense if one of the programs you're taking might be dance or sculpture, where you're really using your body. But you're right, Melissa, just getting out of the house, going and doing new things in new places with other people, all of those things make a difference.
Right. And the social connections you build, I mean, I'm sure that leads to other community activities. So that makes sense as well.
It does.
You develop friends, and friends are important. And I think having, as we've gone through COVID, I think that's probably the first time that the majority of Americans actually experience social isolation. And they're
right.
like, oh my gosh, this is not a good thing to do.
Yeah,
or to have
absolutely
happen.
right. Yep. I think that really did bring this to the forefront. And there's been more and more research about the impact of social isolation, not just on the person that's suffering from it, but from our society as a whole. A study from 2017 that was done by AARP in Stanford estimated the financial burden of social isolation for older people at $6.7 billion, because social isolation produces significant negative health impacts. So this is something we're actually paying for out of our tax dollars when you think about it, because older people are on Medicare. And so it's a societal benefit in addition to an individual benefit, a community benefit. There's just all kinds of great reasons that this should be going forward all over the country.
Well, I agree. So maybe let's talk about what are some of the kind of elements that a successful creative aging program would have?
Yes. Oh, thank you. That's a great question, Melissa. So successful programs are really designed from the beginning to meet the expressed needs and interests of older adults. They often, when someone thinks, I'm going to put together a creative aging program, immediately they think only of the smaller proportion of older adults who have dementia, but they don't realize that the vast majority of older people are really interested in learning new skills, in getting involved in new activities, in enhancing their own lived experience. So, for example, one of our grantees, the Heard Museum, which is in Phoenix, Arizona, they have a really strong Native American program in the arts, and they offered programs on Navajo rug weaving. And that allowed people who were both Native and non-Native to come together and have rich stories to share. So that's number one, designed to meet the expressed needs and interests of older adults, rather than assuming they don't have a lot of capacity. Second, successful programs are led by teaching artists. And by that, all we mean is they're professional working artists who are also skilled in arts education. And they create space for participants to offer feedback to one another, to discuss their work, to talk about memories, to talk about dreams. It's a two-way process. That's an important aspect of community building among participants. So that's the second. Teaching artists are part of the secret sauce here. They create that chocolate for the brain. Third, they're experiential, they're hands-on. They're sequential, meaning you learn to create over time. You're not just learning about the great masters of art, you are making art yourself. And each class builds on the skills you learned in the prior classes. And again, these are often just so interesting to older adults. And I'll give you another great example. The Minneapolis Institute of Arts had a very popular program hidden graffiti. Now, this is not something you would ordinarily think older adults would be interested in, but they have loved these classes. So you learn about the history of the art form, but you also learn the technical aspects. How do you work with a spray can? I mean, there's a whole lot of curriculum here that gets involved. So that's third. They're experiential and sequential. And fourth, and this is probably one of the most important things, is that the teaching artist who runs the programs builds social interaction and engagement into every session. So participants are encouraged to share their experiences and memories. They discuss their work, they offer feedback. And it really is a great way for people to begin to build their social networks. And I guess the fifth common theme of really successful programs is they always have a culmination or a celebration of the participants' creations that is open to friends, family, and sometimes the public. And what this does is it allows friends and family and others in the community to see older adults in a new light. There are great stories of someone through our evaluation coming to their grandmother's reading from a memoir and poetry workshop series that they had taken, and they were just blown away. They didn't know that this grandmother had these stories. They didn't know she was a writer. They didn't know these capabilities there. And these are the kinds of things that move us from seeing an older person as old and seeing them as a person, as a creative individual. So those are the five really key themes that we keep seeing as really important to successful programs.
Right. Yeah. And so two thoughts that I had while you were talking. One is each of these programs definitely seems to use adult learning theory, which is,
yes,
I'm not going to go to a PowerPoint lecture or a passive lecture where I sit there and I'm just supposed to absorb this knowledge. You are given a little bit of knowledge and then you actually do it yourself and building in that classroom engagement. So that was like one
that's
thought.
right.
So I was like, awesome. And then the second part, I think that doing the celebrations and the sharing of what is created also is a really strong and powerful piece of kind of combating ageism, because
Absolutely.
Again, it's like, oh, well, that's a person. That's just not like an old person. That's a full
Right.
person who's had a whole life of experiences. And so that intergenerational sharing, I think, is really important. And so, and who doesn't like to go to a nice party?
Exactly. It's really amazing too, the validation that these artists, as they become artists, feel at some of those culminating events. There was a great example of a woman who had been in a drawing class, and this particular teacher really recognized the importance, excuse me, this particular teacher recognized, should I stop a little
You
longer?
could, although that sounded like your earring fell out. But
This is my AirPod.
yeah, no, I mean, I saw it, but I'm just saying somebody listening. So maybe
So
start
at any
back over.
rate,
You were telling the story
yeah,
of.
yes, a woman who had finished a class on, I believe it was drawing. The teaching artist had arranged a very nice exhibition of all of the class's work at the end and held it in the gallery where they'd been having the classes. And she had inexpensively but nicely matted and framed the students' work that was being highlighted. The student came in and she said, "I'm not seeing my work on the wall." And it was there. It was the fact that it was treated professionally that made her not even realize it was her own work, because it looked good. It looked better than she ever dreamed. And so, all of these experiences really validate the fact that people come to these classes, they say, "I don't have a creative bone in my body." And then they leave, and sometimes they say, "I can say I'm an artist now. This is something I never thought I would do in my life."
Yeah. So my son went to University of North Carolina School of the Arts, and they refer to
Yes.
all of their students as artists. And I just thought that was an interesting way to build a culture. So maybe talk to us a little bit about the power of connecting through art.
Oh, absolutely. We see so many times through these classes. It's a theme that runs on and on. So you might sign up for this 8-week or 10-week course on pick a topic. Anything from choral singing to drawing to dance, you name it. And over the course of those 8 weeks, several things happen. One is that the person who is taking the class becomes very connected to the organization offering it. We hear this a lot. Minnesota Opera offered a course in singing opera choruses, and they thought maybe 15 people, maybe 20 people. They had over 100 people sign up saying, wow, we've gone to the opera years ago, but we never thought we could sing this music. And then they wanted to volunteer. People who take these classes through museums become docents and volunteers and bring their friends and bring their family to the institution. So you see the connection to the organization that's offering the class. And then there's the important connection of the individuals who are in the class amongst themselves. And over and over and over again, we see these 8 or 10 week sessions end, and students say things like, now what am I going to do on Wednesdays? And the groups often decide to self-continue as a group. So whether it's a writing group, there's a great example of a storytelling group that learned the skills of both the writing and the performance aspect. They had so much fun. They decided that even though the class was done, they were not. Right. And they've kept it going for some time. But one of my favorite examples that is probably the most extreme example of social connection through a class was our friends at Lifetime Arts, which offer consulting and training on how to run these programs, told me the story of a class that took place that they observed. And there were 2 people, a man and a woman, who were in that class, had not met before the class, but at the culminating event announced their engagement. So you don't get much more of a social connection than that. But it is this ability when you're working through the art form, you are being vulnerable. This is not like having a cup of coffee after choir practice. This is really where you're talking about your own life, your dreams, your interests, and it just naturally leads to relationships among people that can be really important.
Right. And going back to one thing you said about people saying they don't have a creative bone in their body, I think it's really finding which art form is going to work best for you. Yeah, I can remember I was trying to learn to knit, and I'd knitted like 10 rows, and I had a smiley face instead of a rectangle. And my son walked by. He was like, "Well, Mom," he goes, "at least you're good at computers." And I thought, yeah, so to me, I started this podcast as a creative outlet for myself, before COVID started, and I was glad to have it, during COVID. So so maybe tell us now, like how someone could find a creative arts program in their community and how they could connect with your, with Aroha Philanthropies.
So there are many resources for learning about this. One is our own website, which is Aroha Philanthropies, just like it sounds, .org. I mentioned a little while ago our friends at Lifetime Arts, which provide consulting and training on how to run these programs. And they have a website, of course, lifetimearts.org, but they also have developed a really rich website devoted to creative aging. It's called creativeagingresource.org. And it's really for anyone in the field who might have an interest. I'd also mentioned that we're working with the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. They now have offered this year grant programs and awarded funds to 36 states that are either developing creative aging programs or want to develop them and want to learn about them. So every state, as I mentioned, has a state arts agency. You can look them up. You can call and say, are there any programs in my area? In many states, public libraries have jumped on this bandwagon, and they've learned how to hire teaching artists and offer these kinds of programs in their spaces. I mentioned museums. The American Alliance of Museums has put out a major report calling on museums as, and I love this line, an ethical and strategic priority to develop these programs and work with older adults in different ways. So calling a local museum, art museum, botanical garden, asking if they have any programs designed for older adults. And it doesn't mean they have to be exclusively for older adults. But when you use the curricular model that you referred to, you see why that's important. So I think those are some of the places that you could start. If you live in a city or county that has an arts council, that would be another place to contact. But we realize, we view this as a movement that's happening across the country. This is something older adults don't even know they can ask for.
Right.
Organizations don't know they can or should offer these kinds of programs. So every time we're out there asking about it, talking about it, we are, in fact, long-term affecting, I think, the availability of these programs for more older adults.
Right. And I do think that within our work at the Center for Aging, Health and Humanities at GW, that we actually have built in creativity and the arts as a prong for an age-friendly city and community to have. And so I really appreciate you being here to share your expertise and share the work that you've been doing and helping to raise awareness, because I do think that's probably the first step is, and one of the main reasons I do the podcast is to raise awareness of all the different things that are out there that can help you age well, no matter how old you are.
That's right. Absolutely. And those kinds of programs are so important, and not just in the arts, but things that build on the assets that are unique to older adults. Mm-hmm. So much of what's offered for older adults is very well intentioned in addressing the severe deficits that can come with age, especially with age and disease. But I haven't been putting energy into developing the assets of our older adults. And older people, from my age on up and younger than me on up, have a lot to give. And so to not have that resource available and to just treat people as if they aren't capable, we're missing out on so much. I'll give you one more quick example, but one of our first grantees was an independent high school, secondary school in Providence, Rhode Island, called School One. And they came to us with a proposal to develop classes for high school students and older adults in their community in an art form. And they did storytelling and they did theater and they've done all kinds of things, poetry. They've done plein air painting out on the street, which they said was fabulous because they had the classes out on a very busy sidewalk and everyone would stop and say, "What are you doing here? Why are 80-year-olds and high school students painting together?" But it became so important to the school that they began to build other ways to bring older adults into the learning experience, not just mentoring, but the learning experience that the school could offer, and the relationships that developed between those high schoolers and some of the older adults really continued on. They did become mentors. They did teach each other things that they didn't know before. So you see this vibrancy, this vitality that can come out of this kind of approach. And we're really grateful that organizations are starting to step up and offer them.
Yeah, so that makes me think we should add a sixth part to a successful program, which is building in intergenerational activities and reciprocity. It's not just about one generation given to the other, to make sure that it is something that's reciprocal.
You are so right, Melissa. I mean, when you talk about intergenerational programs, the first thing people always think of is, toddlers in the nursing home. But actually, even among the older adults, we have to remember that older might mean 55. It might mean 105. How many generations are in that group? We're not just old versus everybody else. We're all in an evolution to next stages and next generations in our lives. And there's so much opportunity in bringing people together in that way. So,
yeah. Oh, I have to agree. So, well, thank you so much. This was a great topic and a great episode, and I appreciate everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We at Aroha are so grateful that you have this interest, that you're at the center, and you can take a leadership role in bringing this to more and more people across the country.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for tuning in to This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World. I'm your host, Melissa Batchelor, and if you'd like to learn more, you can check out my other episodes on my YouTube channel by subscribing and ringing the bell to get immediate notifications when new content comes out. In addition, you can also find the audio version of the podcast on Amazon Music, Spotify, iTunes, and Stitcher. Please feel free to leave an honest review, because more reviews mean more awareness of the podcast and helps us move towards an age-friendly world. If you have a comment or a question, you can visit my website, melissabphd.com.
go to the Contact Melissa tab and you can leave me a voice message. You never know, it might just include your question or your comment in an upcoming episode.